Well, hey, Lakewood Church, this is John. I am so excited to be part of what God's doing here at Lakewood, and this is a cool opportunity for me to get to share some things with you. And so I thought I would share with you my faith story. I was born in Long Beach, California, and I grew up in Southern California. My parents had met in college and in California. My dad's from California. My mom is actually from Arizona, but they settled down in a little suburb of the Los Angeles area called Cypress, which is about 10 miles in from the coast and probably about 25 miles south of Los Angeles, although it would probably take about an hour and a half to get to Los Angeles from Cypress, just because of the way that Southern California traffic works. But we grew up there and lived there until I was 10. And when I was 10, my dad and mom decided that we would move. And not so much because there was something wrong with Cyprus or anything, but it was my dad was ready for a change. And my mom was okay with that too. So we moved to Seal Beach, California, which was only 10 miles away, and it was on the coast. And it was kind of a dream setup for us. My dad grew up at the beach. He was a surfer, and so when we moved there, he taught me to surf. And I loved living there. We lived probably an eighth of a mile from the water's edge. And so I would surf before school, I would surf after school, I would surf when I skipped school sometimes if the waves were really good. But I loved living there. And one time, my friend and I were sitting on the beach and we were just watching the waves. The waves were really, really big. There had been a storm, and we were just watching and talking. And I noticed that there was this man that was like down the beach, and he was walking toward us. But as he was walking, he would stop and he would talk to different people. And I could tell that he wasn't there because of surfing or anything, because he was wearing like a khaki pants and a button-down shirt, and he had his back to the ocean. He was just talking to the people. And when he got up to us, he asked us, "Do you know what a Christian is?" And I had grown up in church. My parents are both Methodist, and they took me to church, my sister and me to church every Sunday. We were regulars. We were deeply involved in the life of our church. And so I gave him the best answer that I could. Being in eighth grade, it was the best that I could do. But honestly, when I told him, what I told him was based on what I understood, but I really did not have a deep relationship with God at all. It was more just repeating things that I thought I had heard. And so what I said to him was, a Christian is somebody who patterns their life after the teachings of Jesus. And I felt pretty good about my answer. And my friend who was with me, who did not go to church, I would like to think that he thought it was a good answer too. And the guy who his name was Phil, he introduced himself. His name was Phil, and Phil said, "Well, that's a good answer. There's a lot in that is very true, but you're missing a piece that's really important." And he said, a Christian is somebody who has invited Jesus into their heart, somebody who has accepted Jesus as their Lord and Savior, and they have a personal relationship with God through Jesus. And so he talked some more and told us some things and showed us some things, and we listened for a while, and he finally asked us, "Would you like to receive Jesus today?" And so my friend and I did. We prayed with him. He led us through a prayer in which we received Jesus. We accepted Christ. And it was very, very powerful for my friend because he was really moved by what he had heard. It ended up being powerful for me, but I will tell you that in the moment, I was really just wanting him to keep on walking. But actually, as I prayed the prayer, I really felt something, and it was a very powerful experience. Everything about my life from that point changed, and I started reading the Bible on a daily basis. I started asking a lot deeper questions with my Sunday school leaders and with my parents. And I really felt like I had begun a personal relationship with God. And so it was a really important moment. And I'll tell you that a few years back, I decided to Google the man who had talked with us. His last name was Cole, Phil Cole. And so I Googled Phil Cole. And what came up was his obituary that was in the Los Angeles or the Long Beach local paper. And so I read his obituary, and all it said was Phil Cole died at age, and I can't remember the age, but he died. He had been a longtime resident of Seal Beach, California, worked at McDonnell Douglas for 40 years, and then it just said, Phil loved the Lord. And I got to tell you, when I read Phil loved the Lord, I cried because I thought, that just, man, I am so glad that Phil loved the Lord. And I'm so glad that Phil loved the Lord enough that he would risk the ridicule and the rejection of walking down the beach that day, sharing the gospel with whoever would listen, because it was such a life-changing moment for me. And so I'm so grateful that Phil loved the Lord. Well, life went on from there, and it was not the case that I just continued on daily with my readings and never strayed from the path. I'll tell you that when I got to college, things kind of took a hard turn, and my belief in God began to fade. By the time I graduated from college, I'd basically decided that I didn't even believe in God. It didn't work out for me very well in the years following college, and I found myself in a position of really needing to know that God was real. And I made my way back into the church. At first, it was just to be able to sing. Uh, if you go out, there are not a lot of places where a below average singer can sing 4-part harmony with other people. And so I came back to church really just to be able to sing. I missed the singing that we did in worship. But as I listened to the messages and was around church, I began to fall in love with Jesus again. And that grew and grew and grew from there. And I ended up taking a disciple Bible study, Disciple One Bible study, which, if you're not familiar, Disciple One goes from Genesis to Revelation in 34 weeks. It gives you a real nice sweep of the Bible. And during that class, I had some significant moments. One of those was at the end of the class, where everybody in the group will share with each other what they believe might be God's gifting for that person, where they might be called. And the people in my class told me that they saw in me somebody who had a calling to ordained ministry. And when they told me that, something inside me really resonated. I had sensed that call at a very young age. Actually, when I was about 14, sometime after I had accepted Christ, I sensed the call to ordained ministry. So hearing it again all those years later was really important for me. Another thing that happened in Disciple One Bible study was that there was a point at which I was reading one of the Gospels, and I honestly can't tell you which one. I don't remember. But I remember reading that if you pray for something in Jesus' name, it'll happen. And so I took that quite literally, and I sat down that night and I prayed a prayer where I asked that God would bring to me a woman. I was single at the time. I didn't like being single. And so I asked God, I said, okay, in Jesus' name, I ask you for a woman. That was the first thing. And I want that woman to have brown hair, and I would like for her to have a faith that grew over time through difficult circumstances, something that she and I could relate on, where it wasn't the case that she had just grown up in church and never strayed. I wanted for the person that God would bring into my life to be somebody who had come to their faith through struggle. And then I threw on top of that I would want for her to like the Grateful Dead, because they are my favorite band. And so about 2 months later, I missed church, but I had a couple of friends that called me individually. The first person called and they said, "Hey, there was this girl that came to class today. I was in a young singles class, and we think that you're really going to like her. There's something about her. We just thought, man, John and she would probably really like each other." And then just a little while later that same evening, another person from the class called and said basically the same thing. And they swear that they did not talk to each other about this. About a week later, I got to meet um, this girl that they were talking about, and she had brown hair. So okay, well, lots of girls have brown hair. But I asked her out on a date, and we went out on a date. And during our date, uh, she began to share her testimony where she talked about all of these different struggles that she had had and how she came to accept Christ. So that was pretty cool. But while she was telling me this story, at one point in the story, she said, "And then I was at a Dead show," and she paused and she looked at me and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Are you familiar with the band called the Grateful Dead?" And at that point, I thought, oh my goodness, God has answered my prayer, and this is the woman that I am going to marry. So I knew that on our first date. Um, Amy wasn't quite as quick to realize that that I was the person that she would marry. She needed like another week, but after that, we have just been together, and we've been married for 22 years. Well, it will be 22 years in just a few weeks, and we have two children that I can't wait to introduce you to. Um, Another part of the story is that when Amy and I got married, she was hesitant about me accepting the call to ordain ministry. But about 2 or 3 years later, she had been in prayer and she sensed that God was telling her that she needed to support me in pursuing ordained ministry. And so God really put it on her heart that ministry was something that He had in mind for us to be doing. And so she came to me and she said, "I don't want to hold you back from getting ordained." And so I began the candidacy process then. I got ordained in 2010 and as an elder, and have served in 3 churches. And now I'll be coming to Lakewood, which will be my fourth appointment. And so I just wanted to share that. Thanks.